Hello and welcome to the Moonshots Podcast. It's August 4, 2017, and we have reached the almighty achievement of episode 5. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, and I'm joined by the man himself, Mr. Chad Owen.
Hey there, Mike. I'm still living in the past. It's only August 3rd for me, so you're quite the futurist there.
So we have some exponential singularity and futurism all happening already, and we're like 1 minute into the podcast. How are you, Chad, after a well-deserved vacation? Are you enjoying the hot, humid East Coast summer?
I cannot complain. I really, really enjoy New York summers. Being able to actually have seasons is really nice. You know, sometimes coming from a place like Texas where I grew up, it's either really hot or kind of cold, and not really anything in between.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of San Francisco, which was, constantly, 65, 75. Degrees and a little bit overcast for like 90% of the year. But if there's any city in the world that gives you extremes on the seasons, it's New York, isn't it? It's from snow to belting hot humidity.
Well, I would actually counter with Chicago, and I spent 4 years in school there, and the winters there are quite brutal. And if you don't have an air conditioner in the summer, sometimes you feel like you'll melt. And I also bring up Chicago because our subject for today's podcast kind of became known while she was working in Chicago.
Indeed.
So I'm really excited to break down a conversation that Oprah had with some students at Stanford University a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and we have to give a heads up to all the listeners because this is really very different set of insights that we can get from Oprah compared to any of the other innovators that we've had and focused on the show. I would say this is quite a radical pivot to what we've heard from the likes of Elon, Jeff Bezos, and so forth. But it's very exciting to get such a different perspective, don't you think, Chad?
Oh, yeah. I love Oprah. I just eat up everything that she says. So I'm really excited to share some of this with all the listeners.
Great. So before we jump into a world of Oprah, let's just check into the very high-tech Moonshots news tracker. And let's look at some of the headlines that the companies we've been following have been making, and let's kind of pick off a few goodies here. I thought it was quite interesting. Elon Musk's group of companies, this ever growing group of companies, have been very busy. Quite on a different tack to what we talked about in the Elon show. They've actually delivered his first solar roof. Tiles have actually been built and delivered to their first house. And what's so important about this is for the listeners who are not up to speed on this, he's obviously through solar power, he's actually bringing together this incredible solution where there are these beautiful solar roof tiles that do not look like those terrible solar panels you have traditionally. They're actually, the solar power is built into the tile. And Tesla actually released the first one onto a house. So if you check out our show notes at moonshots.io, you can actually see the photo of the first house that has them. And it is so beautiful because it looks just like a very nice premium roof tile. But is actually generating power for the house. So that was big news in Elon land. But I have to say, and I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but they released a series of epically beautiful shots of the interior of the Tesla Model 3. Did you have a chance
Yeah,
to
I've
see
seen
this?
I've seen some people kind of pop up on YouTube on the YouTube always gets you, with the you might also like clips, and clearly they knew that I was doing research on Elon, and so all of the people testing out the Model 3 came up there. I think it's a beautiful car, and I think if they can meet all the deliveries, they were hoping to ship, I think, like 500,000 cars. That's going to be a tall order for them to be able to fulfill all those orders.
And if you have a look at the link that we've got in the show notes, there is an epic shot of the interior where you see the digital display that they have, and what looks so epic is that it's a 15-inch display right in the middle of the dash. So apart from the fact that the interior overall is incredibly minimal, it actually, when you first look at it, it looks like it's missing things because it doesn't need the gear sticks and all the other things you're used to seeing in a car. It's just a huge monitor on the dash. It's pretty striking, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you're into that sort of thing, it's not for everyone, but if you're a minimalist, yeah, it's your dream car.
Absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, this was really interesting on the Uber side of things. News came out earlier this week that it appears that the drivers have actually been trying to work out how the algorithm works at Uber. And what they've been doing is they've all been essentially checking out of the app and saying that they're not available to drive and reducing the inventory available. And they're forcing the app, creating a false marketplace where...
Yeah, to increase the prices to get them back on the road.
Yeah.
So then effectively getting themselves more money for each ride.
And I think this is really interesting because obviously the drivers are trying to game the system, and it's a huge weakness in the way they've designed the algorithm. But I think something that you've brought up before on the Elon show was it does suggest that drivers are prepared to do anything they can to increase their earnings on Uber, because as the conversation goes right now, a lot of drivers feel that they're underpaid by Uber. So I think it's a bit of a natural consequence, don't you?
Yeah, it's been surprising to me how long it's taking for the marketplace to kind of find its equilibrium. It's just Uber has been injected with so much cash they think they can afford, to just bleed money. But, my big question is, if Uber can ever find that equilibrium where it has enough riders willing to pay enough money to keep enough cars on the road. And I just think there's too much cash in the system. There's also, too much shadiness on everyone's part.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray around Uber, and there's without doubt there is a way forward. But I think the new CEO will have a big job of finding a balance in that equilibrium. And they obviously have this marketplace-based business model where you have drivers and riders. And just like Airbnb, you have to do an incredibly attentive and rigorous job to keeping the marketplace in balance. And I would actually say that Airbnb succeeds much better in keeping harmony between the two parts of the marketplace. So big challenges ahead for Uber, and I'm sure that they were dreading all of this news coming out. I think they were just looking for a bit of a respite from all of the negative press.
They're going to be a whipping boy for some time to come.
Yeah. Tough job to walk into. I think it's all uphill. I think the good days, the easy days on Uber are over for the leadership there. Okay, now another interesting thing, and I didn't actually know of this partnership, but it turns out that FedEx has actually had a long historic partnership with Boeing, and they're working very closely together. They announced a new stage to their partnership where they're looking to drastically reduce the carbon footprint of the FedEx jets. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes, and you can check that out Really fascinating just to see the extent to which they're trying to innovate, and in this case, really tackling the carbon emissions that jumbo jets are just so famous for doing. But perhaps the biggest news of the week, once again, is going to Amazon. And as things are ramping up for the big back half of the year, which is for retail, is where all the money gets made. Amazon has announced that they are going to hire 50,000 people to help with the seasonal retail trade. And it just tells you how not everything is great in the American economy, because Amazon have been overwhelmed with applicants for these new 50,000 jobs. They literally have had queues all around America for people coming to these job fairs that Amazon is putting on. And it tells you that there's a lot of Americans need to actually work 2 or 3 jobs now, because the idea of one long-term job seems to have gone the way of the dodo, and now it's about all this fractional working and so forth. But the crowds, Chad, for Amazon have been huge.
Well, and I think it's really insightful on their part to take advantage of people, like you said, moving into that fractional work model. And, I think it will only help them, reach their sales. Neither of us would be surprised when Amazon, breaks all of the e-commerce, numbers this holiday season.
Right. So huge momentum there. Also a delicate job, balancing a marketplace between buyers and sellers. But lots of stuff happening in the Moonshots ecosystem. So we'll have links to all of those articles that we just mentioned in the show notes at moonshots.io. All right, Chad, bring us into the world of Oprah Winfrey. Why did we choose her, and what makes her so special?
Well, first, I'm actually a little curious, not as a Native American, what was your first exposure to Oprah, or, were you exposed to her? Or did you kind of find her a little later in your life?
No, she was huge over here. Just growing up, Oprah was huge here in Australia, just as were the San Francisco 49ers, just as were the Chicago Bulls. She hopped the Pacific Ocean, and she was here in full effect. Her show was incredibly popular, and I think she's as much a known name here as she is in America.
Well, I wanted to do a little bit more research on Oprah, just because I think she's so different from when most people picture, innovation, moonshots, innovators, disruptors. They maybe don't think about Oprah, and I would argue that they should absolutely have Oprah, as an epitomized version of an innovator and disruptor. Just her story is so compelling, and we can learn so much from it. She grew up in a poor family in the South and worked her way up through the ranks of television to then, finally discover talk and interviews and launch her own show, the Oprah Winfrey Show, and it had an amazing 25-year run. I went to, as I said, I went to school in Chicago, and I worked for a grip and lighting company, which rented out all kinds of film equipment to productions all across the Midwest, and one of our clients was Harpo Studios, which is Oprah's company. So there were times where I got to go and make deliveries to the studio. And so that's kind of just a fun little personal connection, but I think there's so much that we can learn from her.
Yeah, and I think what's really special about her journey was she grew up in abject poverty, but she was reading and writing at a very young age. She actually skipped classes. So she went from the first year to the third year, and then she was so brilliant in her year 3 as a young little girl. They boosted her to the 5th year. So that part of her story is really, really special. But also the fact that she's gone from growing up in poverty to being worth over $3 billion, and she's ranked as the most wealthiest African American, and has had such influence over many decades. She's won pretty much every award in her industry she can possibly win. She has an Academy, Daytime Emmys, Primetime Emmys, Tony Awards. She even, if I get it right, Chad, she even stopped making herself available for Emmy Awards because she just kept winning all the television awards. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite Steven Spielberg movies, The Color Purple, she, that was where her Academy nomination came from. And I think she, in terms of just like a personal connection with people, like everyone knows who Oprah is.
Yeah.
And I think it's because she's able to just really connect with people. And I think that's her power. And she knew how to capitalize that and build her media empire.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that her personal she has this incredibly high emotional intelligence. This has not only made her successful on the screen, but what's really interesting, it's made her so powerful, so effective, and so successful behind the screen as an entrepreneur. And I think that's really, really fantastic that the thing that makes you so great in your practice is also used in being entrepreneurial. So we had the good fortune of finding a really great interview with her where she really laid it all out at Stanford University. And she really gets into a headspace of thinking about entrepreneurialism and innovation from a completely different point of view to that, say, of Elon and Jeff Bezos. And it really excites me to be able to share this with the audience because there's a lot to learn in what she had to share. I think for the listeners coming up, we've got a lot of insights in how to soldier through when you're overwhelmed, how to avoid making bad decisions, how to take good care of yourself, not only physically and mentally, but also emotionally. And this is really undersold as part of the entrepreneurial journey. It's not just mentally and physically grueling. It is emotionally fatiguing. Let me tell you that. And what's great is there's a couple of practices that she has that really drives her success. And I think there's a lot here for the listeners. There's a lot here for me, and it complements some of the more cerebral thinkers that we've had on the show. This is really a journey into personal awakeness, spirituality, connecting to who you really are, understanding who you are so that you can unleash that in terms of your entrepreneurialism and what innovations you can bring to the world. So I think, Chad, this is your chance to bring us into that first clip.
Yeah, well, I'm just excited to dive right in. I think you're right. It's her unique perspective, her emotional and spiritual perspective on the entrepreneurial journey that made this interview so interesting to me. And she's able to boil things down very simply and just get you nodding your head along with her. And she talks about how she's kind of discovered her own emotional intelligence and how she uses it to kind of guide her in what she's doing. And so here she is talking about that.
You have leaders who are self-actualized and understand what your contribution to change the world can be. You can only do that if you know yourself. You cannot do it unless you take the time to actually know who you are and why you are here. There is an innate, supreme moment of destiny for everybody. And you cannot fulfill it unless you have a level of self-awareness to be connected to what is the inner voice or the instinct. I call it your emotional GPS system that allows you to make the best decisions for yourself. And every decision that has profited me has come from me listening to that inner voice first. Yes. And every time I've gotten into a situation where I was in trouble, it's because I didn't listen to it.
I'm just amazed that she has such clarity, about what her purpose and what she's doing is. She calls it the supreme moment of destiny. Like, don't we all want to find that?
Yeah. She really touched on a couple of things here that I thought was really good. I think there is this idea of listening to your inner voice, and it was so interesting. She used the language, the things that I have profited from. Okay. So when you think about achieving success and wealth and all that good stuff, it's all come from listening to that inner voice. And then she compared that to that she can even draw a line that when she gets into trouble, it's often because she has not been listening to that inner voice. And I found that very insightful, because when you're under the gun, when you're trying to get things done, sometimes that inner voice is speaking to us, but it often is suggesting hard work or change. And we sometimes choose to ignore that because it's just too much work. And I think it's very powerful that she calls us back to listening to your inner voice.
Or we're just moving too fast to be able to sit still and listen to it. I think that's another thing that she brings up in this interview, is being very comfortable in knowing yourself, as she says in this clip, so that you know when the voice is speaking to you. Because we have so many things that are coming at us all the time. I think I've always seen her as a supremely confident and empowered woman and person. And I think it's because she knows herself so well and she's able to listen to that powerful inner voice.
Yeah. And you really hear it in her voice. She really is like, she actually sounds very present. She sounds very even and warm in her voice. Even if you weren't really focusing on what she was saying, it's the how she's saying it. She obviously has that. So I wanted to share with you one of the things that I do to try and capture that inner voice, all of those thoughts. And, my mind races a lot. I have found journal writing every morning. Well, I'll admit that I don't get it done every morning, but most mornings I will write a journal. And I have found this a really great way to get in touch with my inner voice and really reflect on the days past, and to then set the agenda going forward, and not only saying what happened, but how I felt about it. And that's been a really good tool for me to use, journal writing. So I'm interested, what things do you use, Chad, to try and connect and hear that inner voice?
I would like to plug one of my favorite apps out there right now called Headspace. It's a simple and free. You can go through a whole meditation course for free on the app. But I love taking time out first thing in the morning to just sit. Sometimes I sit for 2 minutes. Sometimes I can sit for 15 or 20 minutes. But I think that physical stillness helps me, just be more in tune with myself as I go through my day. And I definitely notice a difference when I'm able to stay with the practice and when I kind of am not. There's definitely a shift that happens.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that, like yourself, love Headspace. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. It's definitely something a lot of people get a ton out of. And I think also journal writing, for me personally, that is great. That's just getting it all out. That process of writing is not only about the purge, but you often, when you're forced to write something, you gain so much more clarity about what the actual thought or idea or insight is. So 2 very good tips there to build on that emotional GPS that Oprah was talking about. So let's jump into sort of a very very interesting thought about how she is going about unlocking not only this inner voice, but how she's finding her own spirituality. She talks a lot about being awake, and she has, in this next clip, she really gets into this idea of living from the inside out.
I sit here, profitable, successful by all the definitions of the world. But what really, really, really resonates deeply with me is that I live a fantastic life. My inner life is really intact. I live from the inside out. And so everything that I have because I let it be fueled by who I am and what I realize my contributions to the planet could be. And what my real contribution is, it looks like I was a talk show host. It looks like, I'm in the movies. It looks like, I have a network. But my real contribution, the reason why I'm here, is to help connect people to themselves and the higher ideas of consciousness. I'm here to help raise consciousness. So my television platform was to help raise consciousness.
What was interesting in this thought of living from the inside out is that she talks about connecting people to themselves and to their consciousness. But what for me is the ultimate authenticity here is if you just listen to this interview, it's undeniable that she practices what she preaches. So to me, this creates this alignment. If you find practices, if you find things that you do to live your purpose, they intrinsically feed to how you can be, how you can have impact around you and outside of you, how you can help others, how you can make a contribution. And frankly, when you get home on a Friday night, you can feel good about all the things that you've done in a week. And this is great advice that, oh my gosh, if I had heard this when I was a teenager, oh my gosh, how many mistakes may I have not made? But this living from the inside out was very powerful starting point to sort of unlock your potential. When you heard this clip, Chad, what really spoke out to you?
I think it was almost shocking to hear her say that her real contribution and what she has to add in the world is unlocking people's consciousness, and that drives everything that she does. Because we see her as something different. This TV personality or this actress. But she knows that her actual, true calling is to help people connect with themselves. And I think that's why her brand, her product, if you will, is just so appealing and attractive to such a wide audience, and why she's gotten, the audience that she has.
Yeah. And I would argue that, if you were to look on the trust meter of most trustable celebrities and famous people, I think Oprah is right up there, because you only need to spend a little bit of time watching and listening to her to know that there's no pretend going on here. She is practicing what she preaches, and she's really getting in touch with what's happening on the inside, and sort of unlocking so much impact on the outside. She's started schools. She's helped impoverished families. I mean, her track record on philanthropy is amazing, and as much as her track record in the media world. So living from the inside out was a big takeaway from this bit. Now, I think we should pop over to some of the moments that she talks about when she has faced great challenge. So, Chad, do you want to set up this next clip where we get into some different ideas?
Yeah, I loved some of the questions that the Stanford GSB student was asking Oprah. They weren't very standard questions, which is always refreshing. And she elicited, from Oprah, some things that maybe she hasn't, that we don't hear her talk about very often. And failure is one of them. She overcame a lot of hardships in her professional career, just simply as a woman and as an African-American woman. She was a co-host of a show, and she found out that her co-host was making more money than she was. And she kind of steeled herself and talked herself into going and talking to her boss and said, I want to make as much money as my co-host because we do the same job. And her boss didn't really hear her or understand, why she was asking for that. And, said, well, do you have kids? Do you have a mortgage? Do you have a family? No. Well, then why should I, pay you as much? And she didn't walk away from that discouraged. She walked away from it knowing that she wasn't meant to be there, and that she was, kind of destined to do something differently. So here's her in her own words, kind of just talking about how she's learned those lessons and how she kind of applies that going forward.
I just want to end with this.
Yeah.
There are no mistakes. There is a supreme moment of destiny calling on your life. Your job is to feel that, to hear that, to know that. And sometimes when you're not listening, you get taken off track. You get in the wrong marriage, the wrong relationship, you take the wrong job. Yeah, but it's all leading to the same path. There are no wrong paths. There are none. There's no such thing as failure, really, because failure is just that thing trying to move you in another direction.
And here she is talking about how she moved in a different direction once she figured out kind of where her place was in television.
And I said to the producers, we are going to change. We're going to turn this around. And I am no longer going to be used by television. I am going to use television. What a concept. I'm going to use television as a force for I didn't say at the time for good. I said, let's think about what we want to say to the world and how we want to use this as a platform to speak to the world. How do we want to see the world change? How do we want to impact the world? And then let all of our shows really be focused and centered around that.
I think it's so interesting how once she figured out her purpose in, raising people's awareness and consciousness, that television wasn't this career that she was fighting against, I'm fighting against all of these hardships, to become a better, broadcaster. But then she's like, wait a minute, how can I use this medium for my actual true purpose? And I think, I don't know when that happened for her, but I'm pretty sure it was pretty early on in her TV career, and that's really what kind of launched it into the stratosphere.
I think the correlation between Oprah and Fred from the last show is that they had this very firm belief that failure does not exist. It's about moving on and using it to make better decisions going forward. And I think that so there's a real connection here between Fred Smith of FedEx and Oprah. I would say that the other tool that I would give to the listeners that really is the segue between failure and better outcomes in the future is really asking the question, what did I learn? And this concept of reflecting on failure, there are many that will argue that our greatest learnings come from failure because the pain is so sharp. We're actually paying the most attention. And success is not as sharp a peak as failure is. You feel failure very directly, very immediately. Something's broken. There's not enough money there. All that kind of thing. It's very sharp. It's very deliberate and very visceral. Whereas if you look at success, it can be sort of more undulating and you're not really quite sure where the peak is. Now, the interesting thing I would encourage everyone to do is look at anything, professionally or personally, that you feel like was not a success. And then go through the practice of asking yourself, what did you learn? And then if you had your time again, how would you do it differently? And I think that frame totally sets Oprah up. And the fact that she can turn TV from being something that used her to something that she was going to use. She was seeing the power of it. She was seeing the negative effect it had on her. And she's like, well, I'm not going to walk away from this. I'm just going to change the game. I'm going to change the mental model by which she looks at it. And this is where you start to see the similarities between Oprah and, say, someone like Elon, which is the power of the mind to think differently. And I think this really demonstrates how she wasn't prepared to take this laying down. She's going to get up, she's going to fight, and she's going to turn the table on television.
Yeah, and a reintegration of her failure into her purpose. I think, how you're saying to kind of look at and find the learnings, questions that I find really helpful, at different milestones are things like, what worked, what was blocking me, or what setbacks did I encounter, and then, like you said, what would I do differently? And I think it's just really important to ask yourself those questions, because if you don't, and you don't capture them, whether it's in a journal or even just asking yourself or having a discussion with a friend or advisor, those learnings will be lost, and it will take you longer, to get on your path, as Oprah says, your true path.
Do you feel like you can look back in your career, Chad, and can you see moments where you didn't get the outcome that you wanted, and have you been able to turn those into positives? Like, have you actually had the chance to practice what Oprah did?
Yeah, one specific example not too long ago was I got really far into communications with a client, and was kind of assuming that, the project was a lock. But kind of at the very last part, I found out that there was another creative firm that was also kind of in the running. It kind of blindsided me. And they ended up being the one working with the client for a number of very valid reasons. But I after the kind of last phone call, I kind of, I reflected on things, and I was like, you know what, I really want to know why they chose the other firm. So I just sent off a quick email to my client contact and just said, hey, can we schedule a debrief phone call next week? I'd like to ask you a few questions, and just learn more about why you, made the decision that you made. And he was more than amenable to do it. And we had a great, 15, 20-minute conversation where I learned exactly why they went with the other firm. Part of it was geography. They were just closer, but they appreciated their approach more than mine. Mine was maybe a higher level 50,000-foot view that I was taking on the project, and the other firm kind of had like a hyper personal approach to the project. And so that was really interesting to me. And it was actually, it was really simple. Just sending off a quick email and asking for feedback. But I don't do that all the time, but I'm very glad that I did it in that instance, because I did learn a lot.
And I bet you felt more at ease with the situation once you'd had that call, because you actually got something out of it. The perceived loss of the project is there's hundreds of projects in the lifetime. So, but the fact that you were able to turn that into something, this actual kind of a breakthrough in the approach, did that kind of reframe how you felt about that whole thing?
Yeah, because it's all about gathering information and the data points. In a vacuum, I thought, was I priced way too high or too low? Did they just not like me? Is my work not any good? Right? You just get stuck in this mental game against yourself. When all I did was, ask some simple questions and got hard data points from the client. It was like, it wasn't really any of those things. It was things that I hadn't even thought of. And it was of no real shortcoming of my own. It was just that, the other firm was a better fit. Yeah. And so I think my ultimate learning was I don't want to just sell my services to anyone. Actually, what I'm trying to do is figure out who I'm best paired with. Who am I a best fit with so that we can all do our best work. And so that was actually, I think, the ultimate learning from that feedback experience.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And that's exactly, you're using the Oprah playbook there, Chad. So I think the opportunity to turn any of these moments that don't go our way into positive next steps is not only a theme of Oprah. If you just go back to Fred Smith and FedEx, my gosh, they faced huge challenges. They thought they'd have 3,000 packages on day one. They had 6. They faced gas and petrol embargoes. They have faced no end of huge, gigantic challenges. And Fred's is like, not taking any of it personally, just like asking myself what I'm learning, getting down to that, and I'm moving on. And Oprah is the same. So I think this is a theme that you'll find across many great innovators and entrepreneurs, that they are just getting on with it. They're getting the learnings and just keep on trucking and don't give up. And there's a lot of that coming up in the second half of the show. A bit of a heads up on what you can expect coming up. We've got this some fantastic thoughts from Oprah around how she really draws upon her motivations, which I know is really fascinating to me. How you can unlock your motivation, because personally, I think if you unlock your motivation, if you can create that drive and that appetite, it's just so essential to create momentum in any pursuit in life. And she actually, we're going to wrap the show with her perhaps one of her bigger thoughts from this interview, which is really how you unlock your destiny, how you actually find your calling. And she gives us a little bit of a formula for that. And I think that's a really powerful thought that we'll come to. But before we get to that, we're going to do something a little different here. Usually we'd have Chad giving us one of his famous book reviews, but he was on vacation. He didn't quite get to a thrilling Oprah biography, but I'm sure our listeners...
I have some on my list that I'm going to go back to and read eventually.
Okay. So you can give us a report in one of the other shows if you do get to those. But I thought it would be really great just to spend a moment. We often refer to the work that you do, producing these wonderful films that really are stories of entrepreneurs and innovators and how they create the magic. So I wanted to take a moment, Chad, and ask you a little bit about this practice of storytelling and filmmaking. And I wanted to know where did it all begin for you, this craft of film and storytelling?
Well, I don't know how far you want me to go back, but I was very much a science and math kid growing up. My father's a doctor, and I was just fascinated by Carl Sagan's writings and Stephen Hawking. And lapped up everything I could at the time understand about Einstein. And I think the shift for me was in college, when I became so overwhelmed at the power of story that it showed me that we're all kind of self-authoring beings, creating our own story of our lives. And I was like, wow. And then then all I wanted to do was use that power to help others, and it was really just conveyed through a mentor that I had in college that just exposed me to some amazing films and filmmakers that just in documentary that just had such an impact on me, and it moved me so much. It took me from this science and math kid in calculus, chemistry, and physics in college to then being enrolled in ethnography and film composition and a political documentary. And that shift took about, I think, 6 weeks.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
it was such a dramatic shift for me. I really understood that storytelling was going to become my new guiding light, or kind of North Star for the foreseeable future. And I've just kind of been running with it ever since.
So give us a sense of the kind of stories that you've been telling of recent times. Like, give us a sense of what story you'd tell and how that gets made.
What I love doing is telling documentary stories about disruptors and innovators. It's usually a kind of band of renegades somewhere out in the world, inside of an organization, that are doing things differently and kind of with some opposition. And the things that they're trying and experimenting with are teaching them, a better way of working, a better way of building products, delivering their services. And so that's what I love doing, is just seeking out those teams and those organizations that are doing that kind of work, and really just helping showcase what they're doing, so that the change that they're looking for in the world. What did Oprah call it? Their supreme moment of destiny can be shared, with everyone else.
That's amazing, and I think it's also important to mention to our listeners that I know together when we've worked on projects, you've been telling the stories, these disruptive stories with companies and brands like Virgin and Nike. What other kind of companies do you work? Do you do lots of startups, lots of science guys? Like, what's the spectrum that you like to play within?
It's really just about the teams, more so than the overall organizations. But other companies like Intuit, Cisco, IDEO and IDEO.org, and even a CPG company like Procter and Gamble, they all have people that are really trying to change the status quo within them, and those are the people that I like to seek out and share their stories.
Nice. And one last question: how are you? The things that you're learning as we do the show together, are there any moonshot learnings that you're finding that are making their way back into your work, into your practice?
Oh, I don't know. I think I shared one of them just previously about the feedback from the client about why I didn't get the job. Yeah. For me, it's interesting that we're profiling Oprah, just because I'd spent the first part of this year really going deep with myself and what I wanted to do with this company, and the kind of work that I wanted to do. And since doing that, it's just made everything else this year so much easier. Lots more opportunities, lots of better work with clients. So it's kind of funny to have it reinforced with the amazing advice that we played earlier in the show.
Yeah. I find myself now using quotes and ideas from Fred and Elon when I'm working with clients and partners. I'm often dropping some Fred Smith wisdom on them, which seems to catch everyone. But that's great. Now, where can everyone find out more about Chad Owen and your work?
I am at stimulus.io, and you can see kind of some photographic previews of some of the work that I've done. And I actually just put kind of a short, I don't know if I want to call it a manifesto, but you can check out the homepage and see what you think. I'm always curious to see, who else I can find or discover to tell their stories.
Nice. Okay, so we'll have a link to all things Chad Owen in the show notes, and thanks for sharing a little bit more about yourself. It was great to get to know and to share some of your work with the listeners.
Of course, and we'll get to you shortly too, Mike. So you're not off the hook.
Okay, I thought I could sneak through there. But getting back to some of our clips and the wonderful Oprah Winfrey, I think it's fair to say we've had a bit of an update from her and a connection with consciousness and self-awareness, living from the inside out, and really how we can turn challenge and failure into a powerful force to move things forward. So I feel like that's what we got from her in the first half of the show. We got 2 more clips to come, and I want to play a very short clip of her talking about where she draws her motivation from. And to give you some context here, you can imagine as an African-American woman, and, you know, to mention the episode that she had when she had to confront her boss about the unequal pay. This is a topic of the moment here in 2017. She was referring to a situation 30 years ago, back in Chicago. So it gives you a sense of what a pioneer she is, but also how courageous she really is. And in this clip, she talks about where she draws her motivation from.
I will literally sit and I will call on that 10,000. I will call on the ancestors. I will call on those people who've come before me. I will call on the women who forged a path that I might be able to sit in the room with all of those white men and love it so much. I call on that.
So there you hear her tapping into this idea of the power of many. She's obviously been at the forefront of fighting for so many different things as a woman, as an African American, coming from an impoverished neighborhood. She's overcome more in her lifetime than what thousands of others would have. And
she's so confident. You can just really hear it in her voice.
To me, in her voice, I heard that she's just like, bring it on. She's like so ready, and she is so up for the courage. But it doesn't come across in an aggressive way. It comes across like, I know why I'm here. I know what I'm fighting for, and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, and it's a fine line, because I think it could cross into arrogance if you take it too far. But Oprah has like just enough of it to really, I think, be able to navigate that world and be very successful and teach us, the white guys in the room, the way the world actually is. You know, not the way that we think it is.
Right, and to me, the tool that she's using here is she's identifying with the bigger movement, but I think she's also tapping into the source of the battles that she has had and she has won, and she's using that to achieve new things. And I really like this as a way to unlock your motivations. And a tip for the listeners that I think I have found very powerful and in getting into the motivations that drive me is to write affirmations, short positive statements about outcomes, things that I want to happen in the future. And I love devoting my mental powers to focusing on these affirmations. And there's a great book, very old, called As a Man Me Thinketh, which was one of the original writings that talks about the power of the mind, the power of positive thought, and how you have complete and total control of your thought, which unlocks your motivation. And you can see how Oprah is using her thoughts. She thinks of all the people that have come before her, the power of those that have faced challenge and power. She refers to the women that have had to overcome challenge. She uses this as almost her affirmation to move forward. And I think this is a great tool for unlocking motivation and getting a positive view of what's to come in the future.
Yeah, I love the idea of affirmations. One thing that I've done usually once a year is write a 2-page kind of front and back of a sheet of paper letter to my future self, and then write a date on it and says, do not open until this date, and open it then. And I'm always surprised at, sometimes I put these big audacious goals in there and I meet them, and some of the smaller ones I kind of forget about, or, I've decided to try something differently. And so that's been an interesting practice along those lines about, how to give myself the motivation, to do the things that I want to do.
Yeah. Well, we've got this one final clip, which is the perfect adjunct to this concept of motivation and powerful thought. Do you want to set up this last Oprah words of wisdom?
I kind of just want to let her speak for herself.
When you align your personality with what your soul came to, and everybody has it, align your personality with your purpose, and nobody can touch you. And you wake up every day and you are fired up. You're like, oh my God, another day. It's so great. Because everybody has a purpose. So your whole thing is to figure out what that is. Your real job is to figure out why you're really here and then get about the business of doing that. Okay. That's it.
To me, it's kind of the encapsulation of everything that she said, the intersection of your personality and your purpose. And like the real work is finding that, because once you do, then everything else becomes easy. I think that's what she's saying here.
Yeah, and I totally relate to this, because when I was living in London around 2008, 2009, it would have been, I was given a book called StrengthsFinder. And it was the first time, it's sort of pre-Myers-Briggs kind of time. And when I did this book, it really took me on a journey of you learn different behaviors that people have, particularly in their workplace. And then it gives you this quiz. You do the quiz and it tells you your work personality. And it was a real aha moment for me, because I became, I was confronted with how I am and how I behave in the workplace and how I'm driven and how I operate, which it really moved out of subconscious to conscious. And I became aware of the good and the bad of all of the energy and all of the things that really drove me and manifested in the way that I worked and the way that I led people. And this was a huge jump for me when I got to connect with my, if you will, my work behaviors and personality. And I can only encourage the listeners to try this book called StrengthsFinder 2.0. There's another free tool on the web called 16 Personalities, and their argument is that basically everyone fits into one of 16 personalities. You can do a free quiz and I'll tell you which one you are. This too is a very powerful way to sort of get connected to the first half of her equation, which is knowing your personality.
And I'm curious, Mike, if there's anything, you've given us so many great resources about how to drive towards or find or uncover our purpose. Because I think for me, it kind of just blindsided me. And I guess I was lucky in that way. But for you, kind of in your journey of working with empowering teams to kind of create this innovation capability, kind of like, how did that come about for you?
Well, the purpose part there, putting aside the personality piece, the purpose part there is how much I thrive on the creative process of creating brand new things. This is really something that I really love doing. But I would really employ a model that we've used, we've mentioned on the show before, which is Simon Sinek's Why. So, I really love creating new things. I love pioneering. I love the uncertainty of doing radically different things, that just is naturally where I'm happiest. I'm not a manager. I'm not a bureaucrat. That totally bores me, managing the status quo. It's all about, plowing new land, pioneering to new things. And I love doing it together with people, and I love playing very much a role of facilitating and mentoring and helping others, really get their best. And the reason that I love that's the what and the how. So I love innovation. I love doing it together and collaboratively, and very much in a sharing and mentoring way. And the reason is that I think these are the richest shared experiences you can have professionally when you've done something amazing with a great team of people. And I think that that's the formula for having great impact. So when you work with, say, Nike, and you create an app that literally millions of young people use every day to organize soccer games all around the world, that's impact. And that's the model that I use just to clarify and to reaffirm for myself, why I work and what I love so much about what I do.
Using innovation to drive huge impact.
Yeah, because and the way you do it is as a team, collaboratively together. And I think that when you're doing those things in that way, the outcomes are so positive. The outcomes are meaningful. They're things that you can look back on and genuinely you want to share with your friends, with your family. You want to, I want to share it with my son who's 11, and I'm proud of it. I feel good. It's meaningful, and to me, that's when I feel best. Which is indeed why, purpose-wise, after spending over a decade in advertising and marketing, I've moved much more towards product design and innovation because it serves my purpose better.
Well, thanks for sharing, Mike. I am just really glad that we've kind of taken this left turn into some overlooked, things in the world of entrepreneurship. I think we often don't take the time to understand our own needs, our own personal needs, which, interesting, Oprah's in some way, like, very selfish in that way. She's like, no, like, turn inwards and look at yourself first. But I think she clearly draws that connection to, by being confident in where you are, just allows you to have such a greater impact in what you're doing.
I would argue the big takeout from me is, you can't know the world until you know yourself. You can't create positive change in the world until you've put yourself in a positive frame. And I look at people that you meet and run into who are obviously lost. And it's so obvious, they're distracted. They're not doing the things that they should be doing. They have almost this aura of disconnection. And it contrasts so much with people like Oprah. When you meet people like that, I remember when I met Will Smith, very similar to Oprah. He is so connected from the inside out. He knows why he exists on this planet, and that's why he has achieved so much. To me, this is what inspires me about meeting people like that. It's the big takeout is know yourself if you want to know the world, know who you are, know what you want to be, so you can make that positive contribution to the universe. And you can't get that job done if you don't know where you're at, if you're not breathing and just aware of who and where you are.
Well, I'm really excited, Mike, that we're staying on this alternative profile track. So who've we decided to profile next?
Yeah, so we want to keep going on a slightly tangential direction. So The next show we're going to do is going to be focusing on Martha Stewart. So also a media celebrity, a very successful television personality with an enormous empire. I actually haven't done the shootout on personal wealth, but I'm assuming Martha and Oprah are going toe-to-toe there. But interestingly with Martha, as everyone will probably know, she's had a lot of challenge in her life and a lot of misstep as well. But she's come back and she's firing on all her cylinders again. So I think she makes for a really exciting show for next week.
And we're always looking for more suggestions for perspectives and personalities that you would like us to deconstruct here on the podcast. So please go to moonshots.io and leave your feedback. You can sign up for our newsletter and share and listen to all of our previous shows. I'd also like to just give a shout out to all of our listeners. Thank you so much. We are doing this for you. Like Mike and I we're going to keep doing this, and as long as we keep having fun, but like really we're doing it for you guys. And so we'd love to get your feedback and just learn who you want us to profile and what kinds of topics you're interested in.
Absolutely. And we've had feedback from all over the world, from London, from Amsterdam, from the US, from Australia. I feel like we need some more feedback from
Romania.
We need feedback from friends in Asia. I feel like that's the continent that's underrepresented here. So please send us your thoughts and ideas. And remember that you'll find everything you need at moonshots.io. That's the clearinghouse for all good things for the Moonshots podcast. Well, that sort of gets us to a wrap. I think Chad and I are going to go and finely tune our emotional GPSs. We're going to embody our best Oprahs for the day. We want to thank you all for listening. And Chad, it's been great. Thank you ever so much.
Mike, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Chad. And thanks to all the listeners. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Moonshots podcast.